nonprofits, grassroots organizations across Canada who we support in their work to bring meaningful change to the world. And we are incredibly lucky to be able to be with you here today, and really just thrilled to have you all with us. So thank you for taking time out of your Sunday to join us. Okay, so we have a full session for you all today. And what we've done is pack all of the information that you need to be able to walk out of this seminar and apply for funding to support your practice or your project. And so we're going to start from the ground up. And we're going to begin with, what is a grant? Where does this money come from? How does funding work? Who exactly is dishing it out? And what are the types of projects and work that grant issuers are looking to fund? We'll talk about finding the right program for you. This is essential. So your time is valuable, and we want to make sure that you are finding the right program for your work and your practice and beginning on the right foot. Where to start? We'll discuss some resources for finding these granting opportunities, because there are certainly a lot of them out there. Writing it. How do you write about your practice and your projects when you're talking to funders? Writing is tough for everyone, and it's super important that you're talking to grant issuers in language that they understand. A little later in the presentation, my colleague Kyle will share with you some tips for writing, including working through writer's block, using clear language, and how to incorporate evidence to create a compelling and successful application. We'll arrive at discussion of the budget. Budgets can be intimidating. And today we're going to demystify budgets and empower you with the tools and resources you need to approach budgeting with confidence and knowledge. And finally, submission. We're going to talk to you about how to submit and what comes after that, keeping track of submissions, what to do when you're successful, and reporting back. As Randell said, at the end of the seminar, we'll have a Q&A period. And we do ask that you write down your questions as they surface throughout the seminar and save them until the end. If you've missed something that we've said, feel free to pop that in the question and we can clarify throughout the presentation, but we'll save all of the Q&A to the end because we have a lot of ground to cover, and we're going to dive right in. Next slide, please. So what is a grant? In the most basic sense, a grant is a non-repayable sum of money given to individuals and/or organizations for either project-based or operating-based costs. Can I get the next slide, please? And the next slide. We're a couple slides behind. That's perfect. So a grant more specifically, and for the purposes of many of you here joining us today, individual artists, emerging or professional, distinctions that we'll return to talking about a little later, groups and art organizations receive grants to support the creation, production, and presenting of works, as well as professional development, residency, travel, and development of the arts sector. There are many different funding opportunities out there for artists that can support pretty well every conceivable mechanism of being an artist. Next slide, please.
How do you find the right program? Next slide. There are a number of search services available for grant prospecting. Now, our top pick is called Grant Connect, which you may be familiar with. Although this is a heavily paywalled service, there's a cute get around if you have access to either a university library account, or you can go into the Toronto Public Library to use a library computer on site. Grant Connect is by far the most comprehensive and user-friendly grants database available in Canada. It's a crucial resource, and it has an easy-to-use search function and a wide range of user-friendly filters to narrow your search. Now, there are other subscription services like Grant Watch, which is markedly more affordable, but it's choppy, not particularly user-friendly, and fairly unreliable in our eyes. This and many other services use effectively a bot to scrape the internet for keywords, which they then represent in a rough format. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this service, but it does get a surprising amount of airtime. I would suggest you review the following. So listservs. Sign up for as many government, municipal, provincial, federal, foundation, corporate funder listservs to get direct, up-to-date email notifications when new grants and resources emerge. Be sure to flag these emails as not spam, since they are definitely liable to be filtered by most email providers. And this is sort of your first principal resource in addition to Grant Connect. As well, foundations. So since foundations are required by the CRA to disclose their audited tax returns, This presents a unique opportunity to find out how and to whom a funder tends to award grants. Quick budgeting side note, this will also help you determine an appropriate ceiling for your ask. As an example, if a target foundation grant permits you to apply for a ceiling of $100,000, but you see that the funder only awards grants in the range of $40,000 to $50,000 with a select few at a higher rate, you should heed this information and budget within or below the most common range. In addition to foundations, like-minded organizations or groups. So be sure to connect with other groups or orgs whose mandates align with your vision. In the spirit of support, most artists and organizations disclose their primary funding sources on their websites. Often that's required as requisite for a successful grant, and they'll happily share with like-minded artists or orgs which grants they pursue. Additionally, colleagues and artists, those relationships you already have are perhaps the most crucial prospecting resource already at your fingertips. So consider reaching out to colleagues, acquaintances, other artists or mentors, just to ask if they know of any upcoming grants you should consider. Try to adopt an abundance mindset here and view your colleagues and fellow artists as, how should I put it, as collaborators instead of competitors. And then also simply Google, set up notifications to your email directly from Google with keywords that describes the kind of funding opportunities you want to pursue. As an example, I have keyword notifications set up for foundation, arts-based grant, GTA grant, federal arts grant, and such. These are kind of the compendium of resources that you have at your fingertips to prospect. Next slide, please. But are you a good match? As I've already said, your time is valuable. So before you start the process of applying for funding, which can require a lot of thought and preparation, it's essential to determine if you and the funder are a good match from the get-go. Next slide. Some questions to ask yourselves as you scrutinize funding opportunities. Who exactly is the funder? Do your values align with the grant issuers? And is that something that's important to you? If your art practice is about, say, the history of resistance to gentrification and displacement in the GTA, it might not make sense to apply for funding from a funder who actively supports gentrification and displacement in the GTA. Ask yourself, is it important to you that your ethics align? And then scrutinize and vet those prospective funders based upon that. Now, beyond assessing values alignment, you want to determine if the grant issuer will fund you and your project. So look at what projects they've previously funded and how they describe the projects they're looking to fund. Next slide, please. On that note, first things first, make sure you're eligible. Organization eligibility is crucial. So as an example, as an org or an individual applicant, some funders will stipulate that in order to be eligible, you must have, say, a demonstrated portfolio, or as with some Canada Arts Council grants, a history of successful applications to gain access to higher tiers of funding. Now, eligibility of proposed projects and programs are also crucial. So some granting bodies require projects or programs that already exist or have run in the past, whereas others will require the project or program to be entirely new. This is a very common metric for eligibility, being a new project or a continuing one. And it's crucial to carefully consider these criteria before putting time and effort into drafting a proposal. Next, be sure to carefully review your expenses, also to ensure that they align with what a funder permits. If you put an ineligible expense or exceed, say, an expense limit, it may disqualify your application regardless of how strong it is. Next slide, please. And over to you, Jordan.
Make a workback plan. An integral part of the process of determining if this grant is the right fit for you, in addition to the eligibility that Michael was discussing from the beginning, is having total confidence in the deadline and the amount of work that will be required. You're not only submitting an application, remember, you are submitting a strong application, and that takes time. As a part of the grant writing process, we really encourage you to set up a workback plan that starts with the deadline and accounts for every other step that needs to happen before that date. Things like taking note of any mandatory webinars that you may need to attend, or perhaps there's a profile that you need to have validated several days before you submit your application. Know what's required and make this workback plan for yourself so you don't miss any steps. Next slide. Where are the keys? How do you apply? There are a variety of ways to apply for a grant by mail, email, online application, by video, audio submission, and so forth. Finding out how you're supposed to submit is an essential first step. And more often than not, it's by portal. And the vast majority of these kinds of applications require creating a portal account. And some of these portals take a few days or more to get access to or register for. And we're going to show you an example of one such portal. Next slide.
All right, enter the portal. So this is the CCA, Canada Council of the Arts portal. Jordan in advance made a profile, logged in. You can see here how they differentiate the different sorts of applications. Most of you will be applying, I imagine, as individual artists, but maybe as groups, and then some as organizations. Often there are grant opportunities for collectives working on something together. So this is a nice kind of cue back to thinking about grant writing through the lens of abundance, that there are collaborative opportunities everywhere and an abundance of them. Next slide, please. And this is the inside. As you can see, there are actually a number of opportunities listed at the bottom of the screen. In this case, you'd click on one of those buttons to get started with an application. And this is actually a relatively straightforward portal. I can tell you from experience that it's not always this clear, which is why we recommend that you explore the portal as soon as possible, as opposed to poking around and exploring on the deadline. Next slide, please. Now you can see there are a number of responses with character counts. Word counts are more typical, but you'll see both. And to check your word and character count, highlight the response, go to the tools menu in Google Docs and review in Microsoft Word, and just choose word count in advance. It will tell you the count for the highlighted section if that isn't crystal clear in the portal. It's really important to do that to avoid overwriting, and when you're submitting, realizing that you have to massively truncate your proposal. So this is essential for grant writing. And next slide, and over to you, Kyle.
Sure. So, yeah. So you just saw the portal. You saw kind of the questions that are actually there. You'll need to log in to find that information. It may give you the false sense of security that you can start doing all of your work in the portal. We want to advise you to not do that ever, 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 because most of these require hundreds, if not thousands, of words of response, and then like a lot of careful thoughts. And it doesn't make sense for you to work within the portal. So what we recommend is, first thing, when you get in, even before you read everything, start grabbing, copy and paste all the questions, all of those maximum word counts, those maximum character counts, and start pasting them into a different document that you can work on outside of the portal. So we use Google Docs, which we like because A, it's free, and B, it's really easy to collaborate. So you can share a Google Doc with someone really easily. They can change it, comment on it, edit it, do all that good stuff, like really easily. Microsoft Word's the other big option, but whatever works for you. The key is you want something that you can work on your own time without like making mistakes, and really review and think about what you're doing. But what we recommend is you use this working document to include all of the information you actually need to know. Like, make it a resource so you've got everything you need when the time comes to submit. Not just your responses, but we, as just a matter of course, like we'll plug the URL for the portal at the very top of the document. We'll put login information so that that's clear when it comes time. We'll also put in the deadline, the time that it needs to be submitted, like all that information. The more you've got, the less you need to check later. And frankly, checking can kind of take a lot of time. So the more work you're able to put in here in creating a working document, the better off you're able to do, or the better off you are. So that's step number one, create that document. Get the account, make the account, put your details into it. Once you've done that, really start looking through the portal. Again, you'll have done this if you're copy and pasting everything, but you're going to start looking around, start looking at the links, start looking at how it's structured. One thing, just learn how it works because they're all a little bit different. At this point, I've worked with so many submission forms and like portal accounts. They're all completely different. They all have different requirements. You want to find out little things like, does the portal auto-save your responses? Do you have to manually save? Little things like that can make a real difference when you are submitting. So you want to take care of that as soon as possible so you're comfortable later. But yeah, that's the key thing. Get your working document in order with all the information you're able to pull from the portal so that you don't have to go there every time you work on this. One quick tip for that. Sometimes when you're in a portal, it'll break everything into pages. Sometimes you can just hit next and get to everything without entering any responses into things. Sometimes they'll give you an error and they'll say you can't move forward till this stuff is filled out. Our practices, if that's the case, we will just write in gibberish. Like I just tap my keyboard, put in nonsense, and hit next. And that way you can get to all of the questions without having to put a lot of work into those first steps. Just remember to delete all that later. All right. Next slide, please. Yeah, the next step for what we do is we'll do a really rough copy and paste into our working document. We recommend going through cleaning everything up after that so that it's really readable, so that all your markers to yourself are clear. That just makes things a lot easier. We actually highlight the questions that require responses in a different color so that at a glance, we can go through and know exactly where we need to put the work in. And the other tip we've written here is get help, which is always, I think, a good piece of advice. These are big documents, or they can be. The more you're able to loop other people in to help you build out your responses, the better off you are. Also, a lot of these funding bodies actually have support lines. So if you look at their websites as you're trying to apply, they might list an email or a phone number where you can reach out and get help for applying. We recommend absolutely taking advantage of that. They're there for a reason. People are paid to make sure that you're able to apply as successfully as you possibly can. Take advantage. If you have any questions as you're looking through, you can get clarification from the funder. You can actually ask the question. And in our experience, they'll respond usually within a day or two. So you can be completely up to speed. That leads pretty beautifully into the final point here, which is we really recommend you start this early. I know you might look at the deadline and think, okay, well, it's in a week. I'll start writing in a couple days. I'll be good. But the writing process can take time. The earlier you get started, the more those questions are already in your head. So you actually have that like subconscious time to start thinking about them. So even if you're not working on them, you can, kind of reflect and build your ideas if you're not at the computer. One thing I like to tell people, this grant writing is a creative process in and of itself. It can kind of help you, you can kind of expand your creative process in working with it. It's a different form than like writing a song, probably a little less interesting, but you want to give yourself the room to be creative in this process, to like really think about your questions, how to respond, how you're going to frame it. Next slide, please. Okay. While you're in the portal, while you're making your working document, these are some key questions we really want you to ask yourself and make sure you've got answers for. The first one, when is the earliest date you can start your project and still receive funding? The deadline isn't the only important date here. A lot of funders will stipulate you can only start a project after a certain date. And if you put the wrong date, you might not get funding as a result. They might reject it just based on what you've said. So you want to make sure you have that in mind. Make sure it's at the top of your document. Similarly, when's the last date you can be working on this and still be in the funding period? Most of the time, it'll be like around a year, but there are different stipulations. We're coming up to the end of the fiscal year for the government, which is March 31st. So currently there's a lot of offers going out that need you to make emergency projects that end March 31st, 2022. So you need to have that in mind. And the other thing is, take a look and figure out, what do I already have answers for, or what am I reasonably confident I can respond to? What do I actually need to think about? What do I need to reach out to other people to find out? Again, you don't need to have every answer right away, but the earlier you can get those more open questions in your head, the more time you can start thinking about them, and the more time you have to loop in someone who can help you answer them. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's an important part of this, and leads beautifully from that point about who do you need to talk to get this completed. A lot of these applications require secondary documents that you'll need to compile to be able to submit. Sometimes they're optional, sometimes they're not. So yeah, they can include portfolio examples, which I presume most of you have, but take a look. They might be really particular. I can give one example. I know the Ontario Arts Council, for whatever reason, they'll accept video submissions of your work, but those video submissions need to be a Vimeo link, not a YouTube link, a Vimeo link, which I don't get it. I've never gotten that, but that's one of those things that you should be aware of as early as possible. You might also need reference letters or letters of support. So often just a letter from a mentor or a community member who's willing to say that you've got the goods, that you can complete the project you're proposing and that it's of value, that kind of thing. If you need that, that's the kind of thing you want to get the ball rolling on as soon as possible, which is why, again, you want to get started early and you want to review everything. It's like, I'm sure someone like Randall probably would be happy to help most of you out, but he's a busy guy. So I'm not trying to volunteer you here, Randall. Or someone like you. Okay. But that's my point. Like, he might not have time. So if you are trying to rely on him, and you find out at the last minute, I can't do it, you don't have time to find someone else. So, yeah, you want to get this going early. The other thing is official documents that can change from time to time. For nonprofits, often you need to be incorporated. You need to have incorporating documents. That might not be necessary for most of you. And you'll also sometimes need to submit a work plan or a budget, often in a template that the funder provides. So all that stuff you got to keep in mind. All that stuff you got to start getting on early, and all that's like as important as writing the responses, sometimes more so. So yeah, get going early. Next slide, please. Yeah, back to letters of support. They're a big part of this process. Sometimes they go by different names, like letters of commitment if you're working with someone. Sometimes they need you to demonstrate that that person knows what you've committed them to. So the format can change. It's a big piece of this, and I think a lot of you might need just to get your bona fides like sorted with a letter for these applications. One thing I want to point out is, yeah, it's written on the screen here. It's not rude to write your own letter of reference from someone. We've actually do this all the time. A lot of people want to support you. That's almost invariably true. But it takes time to write a letter. Even if they're enthusiastic, like that's time they have to set aside to think about it. What we often do is we will write the letter we want them to sign and say, hey, here it is, change anything you want, but if you're okay with this, could we just add your signature and submit on your behalf? And in most cases, folks are A, grateful you took the time to do that for them, B, happy to support you, and C, just like that's time off of their, that's time they don't have to spend helping you. So that's a great tip. Really recommend doing that every time. And then you can get them to sing your praises the way you want to hear it, which who doesn't love that? Okay, next slide, please. Writing it. Yeah, okay. This is very much my department. I do a lot of writing of grants, and it's a big job. But these are the steps. First thing, you want to read the guidelines. We've been talking about this generally, like a lot already, but I can't stress enough how important it is that you know everything you need to know about what they're looking for, what's ineligible, what is eligible, and how you're going to submit. But part of this process isn't just looking at those like hard rules. It's about figuring out the funder. I tend to think of this process as, in some ways, a process of translation, where you're trying to put forth a project, right? You have a vision of it. Maybe you've worked on it with some collaborators. You need to present it in a way that makes sense to the funder and shows why it connects to what they want to see in the world. That's the relationship here. Is the funder wants to give you money so that you can do things that will support their goals. So in reading the guidelines, you can really learn a lot about the funding body that you're applying to. You can identify their values, their priorities. You can think of ways that what you want to do connects to that. And yeah, you can sort of start that project of, not of translation, I guess, but of communication. You're trying to start from where you are and you're trying to loop in someone else. And that's where this starts. So once you've started doing all that, start writing immediately. And that can be as rough as works for your creative process. You can gather information and brainstorm. You can just start adding note responses to all the questions. You can be as rough or as final as you want, but just start writing. The key is, if it's in your head, you might think you've done the job, but for my money, it needs to be on the page before it's worth anything. But anything you put on the page is great. Gather information, brainstorm, talk to your colleagues or your friends or other artists in the field. Tell them what you're hoping to do. Sometimes just bouncing ideas off of people is like so valuable. And then as you go, start polishing and finalizing. Again, I don't know your process, but My tip is get started right away, and if it's rough, that's still a start. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah. Like I said, this really is a kind of creative process, and it's a communicative process. You want to write in a way that's extremely targeted. Again, there are word counts, maximum word counts on these responses. There are maximum character counts on these responses. So you want to make sure everything that you're including has a goal, right? And that goal is to basically prove to this funder that you're worth giving money to. I recommend trying to think, again, in that process of communication, try to emphasize the funder's language without losing yours. Like, you don't have to give up what's important to you. You don't have to give up the way that you think about it. But the more that you can kind of combine their language with yours, the more likely you are to kind of reach that point where they can be convinced. And this is the big point that I really want to get across. And I think it's important for artists, because when you're a creative person, when you're an artist who's dedicated themselves to a discipline, you judge yourself by that discipline, right? You know how good you are at playing music. You know how good you are, writing rhymes or performing and all that. And you judge yourself based on that. But for the purposes of a grant, what's key is you need to step outside of that judgment and think, how do I solve problems? And again, as you're reading the guidelines, you're going to find the problems that this granting body wants to solve. And you can think, okay, how is what I'm going to do solve this problem? And you need to present it in that way. So downplay, you're all great artists. I believe that truly. But that doesn't need to be the key message for a grant. What needs to be the key message is, I'm going to identify this issue, or I have identified this issue, and my project is going to address it in these ways. So yeah, as the note says here, remember, it's not about who you are or what you can do. It's more about it's not about who you are or what you can do artistically. It's about what you can do for your community. And that more likely is going to be more effective in communicating the worth of your project to a funder than any other approach. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah, I used to teach at a university and taught writing. And that's like, there's a lot of ways to do it. This is one tip that I always found really useful, so I wanted to include it. Which is, it's an acronym. It's an acronym for how to structure argumentative writing. So a grant is argumentative in the sense that you're arguing, hey, you should give me money. So that's why the structure works for that. But it's an acronym that I love dearly. It's C, S-E-E, which stands for suggestion, evidence, and explanation. So all of your writing, if you're trying to make points, can actually follow this flow. First thing, make a suggestion. So you make a claim. That's what you're going to back up. So suggestion R.I.S.E developed a thriving community of emerging Black artists. Evidence. Well, I think the evidence is actually in this webinar right now. But you can prove it with stats, with testimony or publications. You can get citations. Ideally, you want to be specific. So we've pointed to R.I.S.E's history of having events and the numbers of those. That's a really strong way to provide evidence. And then when you do that, you can't let that evidence stand for itself. What you really need to do, sorry, I bumped my mute. You need to explain why what you've just presented supports your suggestion. So loop it back in, tie it back in. Don't assume that it's obvious. Explain what your reader should be getting out of the evidence you've just suggested. If you use this structure over and over and over again, it sounds like it might be boring, but I promise it's actually weirdly effective for getting your points across. Next slide, please. Yeah, and the reason I was drawn to this acronym, not only because it helped me understand my writing better, but because I kind of like how expressive it is, because you're asking someone to see what you're doing. And it puts an emphasis on understanding, like trying to present clearly, so making the funder see why they should fund you. And again, we're back to this notion of translation or communication, like taking your vision and putting it in someone else's head through writing. Next slide, please. Okay, I mentioned evidence. This is a big topic. You could spend a lifetime finding like how best to do this, but I want to help you guys out with some general tips on that. These responses in these applications tend to be pretty short, so you're not writing an entire book on like why you're trying to prove facts, but you want to be able to present credible information quickly. So with that in mind, like think about how to support your points. Google should be your first place. Like there are more academic ways to prove that something is true, but if it is true, chances are you can find proof online. Start there. The key, of course, is to use credible sources. Like we all know, we're a few years past fake news being the thing, but like, at a glance when something is garbage information. Try to aim for credible sources. The more, and this is a notion too of like understanding the funder. Think about what they would consider to be credible. If you can find a source that supports what you're saying, from a university publication, from a CBC, that's pretty unassailable for the most part. Cherry pick the information that says, yeah, I know what's happening here. And also say where you got it. This isn't a university paper, or a school paper. You don't need to use a certain citation form, but you want to be able to at least conversationally point to where you got it, so that if someone was looking for it, they could find it too. Right? So I don't know if that means including the link, which is a little messy, or just saying in a 2020 article, or that kind of thing. But point to where you got that information. That's how folks can verify that your evidence is true. Next slide, please. And this is true too. It doesn't all need to be external. Those external statistics are really powerful for proving a point, but your personal story is evidence too. Sorry, next slide. I think we're all aware, I think everybody's aware here, we've used Randell's story in a few applications because it's so powerful and it points to the need for R.I.S.E, so that really matters. Testimony matters. You can provide quotes from folks who've been to your shows or who have dealt with your work, quotes from mentors, that kind of thing. That can all be perfectly powerful evidence as well. And into general writing tips, I like to say this, I've always liked to say this, good writing is good editing. So you start rough, but the real work of writing is looking at what you've got on the page and thinking, how do I make this clear? One thing that I also like to tell folks along the lines of that rough draft writing, getting started early, you don't need to have every response right away. But the earlier you get started, the better. Rough notes, all that gets that gets the hamster wheel in your brain turning. You can start from that. I also recommend write the easy stuff first. If you've got stuff at the top of your brain that you can just get onto the page, awesome. Do that right away. Do that first thing. And the nice thing about that process is it can really help you think about the things you don't have answers for, the harder questions, So I find that's a really efficient way to get going. And then another point, general writing tip, read it out loud. If you're proofreading or if you're just trying to make sure everything makes sense, reading out loud lets you catch the things that either that are ungrammatical or that don't actually make that much sense, because it might have made sense when you wrote it, but reading it helps. And even better, get friends to read it out loud. If you can loop someone in, if you can get someone to read your application responses out loud to you, you're going to find every moment where they stumble. You're going to find every moment where they don't understand what you meant. And when that happens, don't get mad at them. They've given you a gift because oh, that's not clear. I know what I meant, but this person didn't see it. And if that's the case, that's a chance for you to fix it. So really recommend that. If you can swing it, it's the best. Next slide, please. Yeah. And now we're going to start talking about budgets, which are the next major part of
I'm
this.
gonna talk to you about budgets over here.
I was gonna give it, yeah.
Budgets, I'll be totally honest, budgets used to scare me a fair bit, but I find that this definition of budgets gives me hope. A budget is simply the plan for the coordination of resources and expenditures that balance. So resources are what's coming in and expenditures is what's going out, and these columns have to equal one another. So in most cases, you'll need to provide a budget as part of your grant application that breaks down the funding you need to accomplish what you plan to do. So funders are going to look for a clear summary of the expected expenses that aligns with the project you've described and the deliverables you've included in the written part of the application. So budgets are just a way of demonstrating that you've thought through the scope of your project. And you might consider putting together a first draft of your budget ahead of your written application. But for some people, the process of writing the actual application can help clarify what expenses you may want to include in your budget. And in either case, remember that funders will want to see a strong connecting link between the budget and the narrative part of the application. So the budget components, here are some of them that you can anticipate seeing in the application. Eligible and ineligible expenses. Read the guidelines carefully to find out what they will and won't fund. So some common ineligible expenses include capital expenses, which are things like physical items like vehicles, cameras, instruments, as well as legal fees and expenses not related to the direct delivery of your project. Accessibility costs. You can include accessibility costs if they apply to your project. For example, items like translation costs, support workers, wheelchair accessible transit, childcare, and so on. The Toronto Arts Council, for example, has a separate accessibility budget for each grant in order to increase the access for folks participating in and helping to deliver the project. Your request amount. Consider how much the maximum ask of the particular grant you're writing is and weigh it against how much it will cost to deliver your project. Often funders will not approve the total amount you ask for, so that's a good thing to keep in your mind as you're putting together your request amount. And while you're there, you should make a realistic ask. So do consider padding out your budget in a way that ensures you're not going to come up short for your project. A good example is if you're including an hourly rate for your time as a part of delivering the project, be generous with the hours that you're estimating. And if you're including the purchase of a piece of equipment for your project, include a cost of a higher priced piece of that equipment so that, again, if you get partial funding, you'll be able to do some creative moving around of money to ensure that you're able to deliver your project. So this way, you're able to deliver the project that you want without having to pay out of pocket. And don't include any expenses that aren't relevant to the project. Other funding sources, funders want to see that there will be other funding contributing to your project. And I used to think that I used to have a bit of fear around demonstrating that a project already had some money. And I thought that it might give the impression that to the funder that because the project already has some money going toward it, that it doesn't need any more, but this is not the case. Funders want to see other flows of income as a part of demonstrating that your project is going to be executed and is feasible and that you have a plan for this. And showing them that there are pending or confirmed other sources of revenue is an essential part of this. a balanced budget. You should always provide a balanced budget where the revenue and your expenses are the same amount. A good strategy here is to think about what you want funded and work back from there. So you can include all of your desired expenses and then calculate the maximum ask and indicate what other sources of funding you have or intend to acquire to equal the amount that you think you're going to spend on the project overall. Next slide.
Back to the last slide for a second. I think I annoyed my colleagues here until I won them over with, I think of budgets as high stakes Sudoku, where you're really trying to show the way that everything matches everything together. So it seems like really intense because we're talking about money and what seems like high amounts of money, but it's really, really, I don't know. I find it very freeing to think of it as kind of like a game where you're just trying to make sure everything matches. Where that comes across is in filling out the budgets. So you don't need to present just a budget from out of nowhere. Most times you're going to get a template from the funder that will show you how they structure a budget so that you can actually start filling it in, a little bit like doing a Sudoku. Next slide, please. So this is the basic form of a budget, right? Where you're listing, like Jordan was saying, your revenues, your income, and then your expenses, and you're trying to make them match. This is what we use internally when the funder hasn't provided their own template. This is like just our baseline. We need to show some numbers. We'll use this as a document. It's pretty flexible, but it's also not that detailed, so there's a lot of room to work with it. But if we go to the next slide, please. This is a more specific budget. This is what the Toronto Arts Council uses. And again, this is actually one that I think they use for just about all their applications. That might not be true all the time, but most of the time, this is the format the Toronto Arts Council uses. So you might run into this. I think what's really cool about this is it's the same basic structure, revenue and expenses, but they're really clear about what those expenses are. So you can see on the right, you've got the artistic production, which includes artist fees, production technical fees, exhibition programming fees, and then administration, marketing. So they've broken down the kind of expenses they want to see, and they've provided you some structure about how you should be thinking about that budget. So that's really useful and helps you think about this stuff. And also tends to include what's eligible and what's ineligible by omission. If you're not seeing it here, maybe they're not allowing that. Yeah, next slide, please. And I'll pass it off to Michael.
Right. So now this slide illustrates a great starting point to cost out artist fees. CARFAX stands for Canadian Artists Representation, and it shares a number of recommended industry standard practices for paying artists. This is a really useful tool for helping guide your budgeting. And you also will find it helpful to assess a grant's provisional guidelines. And at times, a funder may even provide an example budget that clearly outlines their expectations. If this is the case, mimic the structure and depth of their example budget in the budget you create for your project. Next slide. And as you move towards the day of submission, keep a checklist. Make sure you know everything you need to submit and keep this checklist of what's still needed. You can use the top of your working document for this, which is my preferred method. Also, don't get too confident about the submission in advance. Even if you're pretty sure you've got everything covered, there are frequently little surprises or things you missed when you put together your template or in the portal. I can think of times when the portal actually changed since I originally pulled the template into a Google Doc, which meant doing a lot of little work before the deadline. Now, the more time you give yourself in advance, the more time you have to deal with unforeseen issues. It's also really common for portals to malfunction on the submission date due to increased traffic. Try to avoid submitting on the day of or in the hour of. And in the off chance that you do encounter a technical difficulty, this totally happens more often than you might expect, just immediately email and call the funder just to establish a paper trail. They're typically amenable to either reopening the portal or permitting an alternative mode of submission if there's a technical error. Now, when it comes to timelines,
can I just add briefly, Michael, Twitter also is useful. We had to do that this week, and that's worth keeping in mind.
That's true. We did have to tweet a funder to confirm that they would reopen a portal that closed in advance of their deadline. Often the guidelines will say when you can expect notification. More often than not, you'll find out much later than that. Usually you'll be notified of success or decline via the email you created an account under. But sometimes, particularly with government funders, you'll have to log back into the portal to check or simply follow up with the funder to confirm a notification date if it's already passed. Back to you, Kyle. Next slide, please.
Okay, so let's presume this all went ahead and you actually won funding, which is amazing. Congratulations. Now what should you be thinking about? Let's get the next slide. Yeah. Again, congratulations. It's a big thing that you win funding. It's really key because a lot of funders are looking for proof of your worth. And if you can point to having won funding before, you're actually more viable. So this could be the snowball that starts building into a massive, amazing, giant snowball of success. My metaphor got away from me there, but what do you do? To make sure that that success tracks, you want to start keeping track of everything. So a lot of funds have report back obligations, which means that at the end of your project period, you're able to look back and prove, yes, we completed the project successfully. Yes, we spent the money we said in the way we said we were going to. And also it was successful. So the first couple of things are really easy to prove. Just keep track of your receipts, keep notes on dates when you completed parts of the project. Keep track of the numbers of people who engaged with you. Like if the project was online, like keep track of your followers or your number of Twitter engagements, etc. And if it's an in-person kind of thing, have surveys, have a poll. There's going to be a poll here today, so that can help you build the proof that you're good at this, and that can prove your case later on with other funders. If you can keep one funder happy, you're going to have more success in the future. And yeah, that's my point. Funders love funding the funded. It's a shortcut for them to know you did a great job before. That's like such a vote of confidence. So you can use that win to build your case for the next project. And often, Jordan mentioned earlier, you can show those funds that you've just won contributing to an expansion of that project to another funder. And if they can see, oh, this is already partially funded and they just need extra money for this other piece, that's great for them. Next slide, please. And yeah.
I'll just go back to the conclusion slide, please, one earlier. Yeah, just to add on to what Kyle was saying, I think in a nutshell, funders are looking for, is this a feasible project? Are you the right person to do it? And if you can include previously being funded for previously successful projects, I think that's music to their ears. So we are at the end of, pretty much at the end of our webinar here. And we have covered pretty much every part of the grant application process, from what is a grant, how to find them, how to write about your ideas and overcome writer's block, how budgets work, and anticipating report backs and keeping track of what happens after you've submitted. And we're just about to move into a question and answer period, as well as a poll to discuss any, to have a feedback moment. But before we do, we have a sample application that we would love to show you. This is an application that we have previously submitted, and Kyle's going to walk you through it.
Yeah, so if we could go to the next slide, I'm also going to take a moment and give you, we've prepared a copy of this application that we submitted on behalf of R.I.S.E that was successful. So it can be an example for you going forward. I'm just going to drop that in the chat, and you can make it available after the presentation. But we've pulled some key responses into the slideshow, so you can stay focused here if you want. So usually they will open with a brief project summary, which gives you the opportunity to really do the short version of what you're going to do. So we pitched this to the TAC, Toronto Arts Council Creative Communities Fund, last August. They have 2 intakes every year. August is one. The other is, I think, coming up pretty soon in February, March. But this is what we suggested. So we're looking for funding for 8 3-hour intensive workshops for artists to develop skills for on-camera performance. This was in response to the need to do more virtual performance rather than the live stuff that R.I.S.E is so great at. So this was just a capacity building ask. But this was the basic pitch within 50 words. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a really interesting example. All funders are going to ask a series of specific questions. What's kind of cool about this Toronto Arts Council one is they broke down their question into a number of sub-questions and actually asked us to structure under the headings, which is absolutely what we did, which is really helpful. But yeah, so this let us really structure our responses. If we could go to the next slide, please. So one thing to note in that last slide, the maximum for all those questions was 500 words. That already gives you a sense of sort of vaguely how to structure it. Some things require more detail than others, though, so you're going to want to play with those word counts. Our house style is we kind of try to get as close to the maximum word count so that we've used every opportunity we have to make points and to be persuasive. Sometimes that's not really possible, but most of the time we try to max it out. So this structure was really nice for answering these questions. We got to really drill in and say exactly this. Some are shorter. The what art forms are involved, basically just a list. How do you use your art form to engage the community? This is where we got to be a little more creative. We got to tell R.I.S.E's story, in effect. And get through a number of suggestions about what the work is, what it's doing, why it matters, and doing a really concrete description of exactly what this project's going to be. I think we can move on to the next slide. And again, we've shared a full version with the sensitive information scrub so that you can actually go through this on your own time. Yeah, so these are the rest of the questions. What I want to make sure you see here is that we've, at this early stage, already come up with a fairly concrete design for what the project is going to be. We helped put that together with the R.I.S.E team to kind of have a sense of what's going to be delivered, when, how often. That's all stuff you're going to want to know, so that when you're building out these things, you have those answers in mind. That said, the questions can kind of help you come to those design choices, because early on you might not be thinking quite so concretely. You might have more of a general wish. You can really use this structure to help guide your planning, which is, in my opinion, super cool. Yeah, let's move to the next slide. This next question, again, big question, maximum 500 words. This one's kind of special. Like I said, TAC is pretty particular. They break down what they're looking for in each response. and into a series of sub-questions and subheadings that you can build into your response. This one's neat because, for my money, these are the questions you can start working on before you ever look at a grant application. This is it. So you can take, if nothing else from this presentation, these questions and have them in mind when you're thinking about applying for something. If you can have these answered early, the writing of the application is going to be a breeze. Next slide, please. Yeah, and we've just done that in this really structured way. And we got this funding. It was really exciting. I hope that some of the people in this workshop actually got to benefit from this program. But you can see when it's broken down like this, it's not that daunting. It's 500 words might seem like a lot, but here it's just pretty straightforward, making suggestions, giving evidence, explaining it, and working through. So that's a great tip, I think. Try to break down the question into the pieces that you're going to answer and structure it, even if the funder themselves aren't giving you that structure.
And just to add on one last note to that too, I remember when I'm a gardener, and I at early stages of my gardening interest, I went to a flower shop and was expressing to the clerk that I was really struggling with this, and I just didn't know why I was having so many problems. And they offered me the piece of advice. They said, "Jordan, the plants are trying to grow." And I think that's a kind of helpful thing to keep in the back of your mind when you're writing these, is that the funders are looking to give money to good projects, so they're not fighting you. And I hope that many of them are reading very generously too. So I think if you put the work in, I like to think that they're being received by people who are looking to support good projects, by passionate people and artists and organizations. And that's our presentation. We'd love to open the floor to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us again on a Sunday afternoon and being so engaged in the comments. I love R.I.S.E's crew. They really kind of light up the comments, and yeah, it's so wonderful. So if you have any questions that have come up, I know that we're having some folks join us streaming on YouTube as well. I'll maybe turn it over to our question moderator, and yeah, you can ask us anything about anything we've presented, or if there was anything we missed that you'd like to know. We'd love to hear from you.
We have a question from Brother Love, who said, maybe I missed it, but which organizations give grants, and or which ones could I apply to?
I'm happy to field that question. It's a wonderful one, and it doesn't have a straightforward answer insofar as there are a wide range, a real abundance of funding opportunities, not a scarcity. I would say that most foundations in Ontario and Canada have opportunities for grants. As a place to start as an artist, I would suggest looking at all tiers of Arts Council funding. So the TAC, OAC, and CCA. Check those out as a point of departure, and then connect with your colleagues to learn about how they're funding their projects to create those opportunities for networking, mutual aid, and support. There are a wide range of funding opportunities out there. I'd point you back to the beginning of our presentation, whereby we spoke about Grant Connect. If you have access to a university account or the Toronto Public Library, you can get around the paywall. Otherwise, it's quite expensive, so I would suggest doing that. That's our move. And it creates, this particular database offers a really rich array of up-to-date funding opportunities from across the country. I'd start there. I'd look at the Arts Council. I'd talk to your colleagues, do some quick Google searches, and then just start to go through and vet those opportunities based upon your project.
And I'll add to that too. Michael covered this a little earlier in our webinar, but for my own practice, when I was first getting into grant writing and like learning about the landscape, I would just type in my favorite artists. And often when an artist receives a grant, they have to credit the funder, and they'll do so on their website or social media. And I started Googling my favorite artists and found that there was an overlap in some of the funders they had in common. And that was a really great way to get started, was looking, okay, a lot of these artists have been funded by TAC. Maybe that's where I need to start. And I found that like the landscape of grants available is like pretty vast. And I found that was a really nice way to ease into starting to apply for grants and understand what is really out there.
Great. And we have another question from Ashley, who asked, what does it cost for your organization to work with an independent artist, or is emergent business to business? How does it usually work?
I'm happy to field that one. We work on a sliding scale. We never take a cut from a grant or a contingency fee. I would note that if you're ever working with a fundraising business or organization, avoid those that require you to give them a cut of the grant if it's successful. It's not illegal in Canada, but it's a frowned upon industry standard. And we avoid that and don't go that route. We work on a simple flat fee basis with a select number of organizations and artists who align with our values. And we ensure that our rates are always accessible. So when looking for fundraising support, I would first ensure that who you're speaking with doesn't take a contingency fee. That's the best advice I think I can give as a point of departure, because that's typically a red flag.
I would add to that as well that allocating money for fundraising or grant writing is often an ineligible expense. So grant issuers are really not looking to fund artists and organizations who are outsourcing their grant writing like that. So I think it can pose a number of problems when you work, as Michael said, with people who are taking a cut of that budget that's supposed to be going toward your project. I see another question. I know this isn't my job, but we're emergent fundraising.
And there was a follow-up. Do you guys get paid only after successfully acquiring funding for your client, or flat fee regardless of the results?
I'm happy to field that one. Typically, and across the board, we never take a contingency fee, and we negotiate fees on a case-by-case basis to ensure that our rates are accessible.
Also, adding to that, one of the ways that we approach this is we're creating useful content. So while we're applying to specific grants, those applications can actually help inform future work. So contingency fees muddy the waters of interest, but at the same time, we try to value our work in a way because it will continue to be useful. It's not a one-off. And that's advice for all of you too. If you're putting the effort into one of these grant applications, that's work that you've put into future grant applications that use a similar structure or a similar project. So while it might seem like a lot of work if you're doing it, keep at it, and it gets easier because you've got resources already.
And there's a really nice through line to Musica's question here about if a grant was rejected, would you rewrite the entire application or edit it? Now, to Kyle's point, every application that you write, regardless of its success, is a really valuable narrative asset that you can now draw upon, regardless of whether or not it was successful, for future applications. What I would do, and our general practice with rejected or declined applications, is to immediately follow up with the funder to see if you can glean some feedback and some input on how you may strengthen your application going forward. I would then use that as a basis and a skeleton for the next intake period for that funder, or to repurpose and strengthen that material for a different funder. So I would never scrap that application. I would instead view it as a crucial building block and something that you can learn from, build upon for future applications.
Great. And we have a, oh, sorry. We had a question from our YouTube family. How do you ensure that your rates are accessible? If an artist has $0 to hire a grant writer, how would they get to work with you? So I think that's more specific to your organization.
That's a really good question. We work, as I noted, on a kind of case-by-case sliding basis. And we do from time to time, as our capacity permits, because we're impact forward, offer pro bono work. And we always ensure that our rates, and I would encourage you with whichever fundraising organization you may engage with, that you look for those who take accessibility seriously and impact, and those that are working with artists or organizations whose values align. We only work with orgs and artists whose values align with ours, as R.I.S.E does overwhelmingly. And I would encourage you to take that lens or consider it when potentially engaging with a fundraising entity. I see there's
an add-on. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add on to that, which maybe anticipates what you're going to say, which is I just wanted to take a moment to frame this presentation a bit too. We're presenting to you as artists who are capable of writing, like you have all of the tools currently to write about your practice. And so we're not here, advertising necessarily like working with grant writers, because I think funders who are, helping fund art projects, they're expecting that you as artists are writing about your own work. So I just wanted to take a moment to like really encourage you that I think that with the right resources, like knowing how to enter portals and paying attention to things like deadlines, like you currently have all the tools that you need to successfully receive funding for your art practice. So I just wanted to highlight that.
That's a really great point, Jordan, that these tools are already at your fingertips. And I hope, and this is one of our principal goals, is that we've kind of demystified this very often kind of mysterious and intimidating space, and build some capacity with folks to pursue these databases, opportunities, and funding moments for your amazing work. And I see Anastasia as a quick question regarding, or has forwarded a question from YouTube, I imagine. Do some grants require you to have an HST or business number to apply? Is this something that should be in place prior to looking for funding? For organizations, almost universally, you would need to be incorporated to apply for funding. Now, there are kind of emerging funding opportunities for nascent and new organizations, and the same does apply for artists, where you will find those sort of startup grants. They're often smaller, the requisites are often lighter, but to the extent that it's possible, if you can get an HST number, business number, if you're an organization, incorporate as a nonprofit. Following that, another great opportunity is to find a charitable trustee if you're working with an organization. Many funders, foundations especially, will require charitable status or a charitable trustee to oversee and offer their charitable number to your application. And sorting that all out in advance is really crucial. So I would suggest, yes, try to get that all done ahead of time. Of course, when you're starting out, that won't be the case, but it's definitely a good kind of first step to take as you start to look to funding. Now it looks like we've got some really wonderful questions here. So I'll just read a few of them off. Jordan, you pulled over and noted, how long does it take to hear back from a funder once you've submitted an application? Why do some funders take so long to get back to you? Great question here. It varies. There's often a processing time. Very rarely our funds released somewhat immediately. In the pandemic, we have seen for organizations relief funds released quite quickly in relation to an application. But typically there's like a 4 to 6 week turnaround time, and that's like on the short end. Whereas with some government funds, particularly Canada Council funds or just federal government opportunities, you can be waiting for up to half a year, 8 months. Some of them take so long to get back to you because they're massive bureaucracies, and they're also vetting hundreds of applications in really complex ways. They'll typically give you a sense of when the notification date is. If they haven't responded to you in that time, I just follow up, shoot them an email, give them a quick call, check their social media. If they've missed the notification date, they'll often update folks on when they expect that to be. In the pandemic, we've seen particularly a lot of missed notification dates for very understandable reasons. So that's common and something to look out for.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Queen shared that they once waited a year for the Government of Canada, and we've had that same experience. And I think that if you are an artist applying for funding, a part of your finding the right grant for you, which we talked about in the beginning of the webinar, is looking at when those funds are released. If you know you have capacity to write one grant, and one grant will get back to you in 3 months, and the other could be upwards of 8 months, maybe then you focus on the former one to know that you're getting that money, or at least receiving those results in a shorter time frame.
Adding to that, one way to frame it is sort of like hustling up new clients. If you're trying to get funding, sometimes funders take longer to get back than you really need them to. But if you're in the habit of applying to various funders, like there, you can kind of get that funding train happening a little more consistently just over time. But yeah, sometimes it's really tough to count on a funder to get you that money like right away. But if it's part of your workflow that you're kind of looking at this over time, that can really have a long tail impact.
And on a related note, you'll often see that when you're successful with an application, that the funder will release those funds in a staggered way. There'll often be a partial release, say 60%, followed by maybe an interim report back, which will then permit the final amount to be released. It's very rare for the full sum total to be released all at once. And I see Lincoln, great question. How does this presentation differ for nonprofits? Not directly. Sorry?
Yeah. Can I field this one, Michael?
Yeah, but by all means, Cal.
Yeah. I saw this question, and I just want to say, like, we tackle all kinds of applications for like a number of different charities, arts organizations, and like social impact nonprofits. And I just want to say, like, for me, the process is almost exactly the same in that, and I want to highlight, think of it in terms of that idea of being a problem solver. Highlight that there's a problem, show how you're going to solve it, and make sure that that's in line with the funder's priorities. If you can do that, then all of these tools work exactly the same. Some of the language changes, but that basic structure is going to be the same for anything you do. Highlight a problem, show how you'll solve it. And just do that.
And we had some questions from YouTube. If I want to become a grant writer, how can I set my rates?
That's a great question. I think that, in the spirit of what Kyle was sharing about what is the difference between applying for arts funding versus, healthcare funding or versus anything else, I think you can kind of apply a similar framework that we talked about to setting your own rates for grant writing as well. Is like, because really what we're talking about is a process of assessing the project, like the project of submitting an application. So if you're setting rates for writing grants, consider who you're working with. How much time are you going to be spending in comms with them, answering emails, having discovery meetings, learning about them? what kind of applications are they going for? Are they going for a small one-time project application, or are they going for multi-year funding? I think you can apply a similar framework to that. And I think beyond that, there's sort of a whole world of how to structure finances. And we would definitely welcome an offline follow-up to share a bit more information about that. But I think that it's kind of a beautiful connection that your question has made here, which is that the structure that we're telling you about today for anything that you're doing in the arts as well, like what is the problem? What are the steps involved? Making a work back plan, valuing your time and accounting for it. I think that those are all the same processes that you could apply to setting your rates as an artist as well. Resources that Michael shared, like Carfac as well, starting to ask friends working as an artist or grant writer or in any creative industry, see what other people are making, assess how much time it takes, and then you can kind of begin to cobble together a sense of what you should be charging for your work.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I'll let you go, Michael.
Well, I just wanted, there's a really vibrant and rich conversation happening in the chat. And for folks on YouTube, I wanted to highlight a few points that Queen and Elle shared that are particularly resonant and I think applicable for both artists and organizations. The first being set expectations. You're not going to secure every grant you apply for, regardless of how incredible it is. So set those expectations and assume as a baseline that you're going to secure 30% of those grants you apply for, and therefore cast a wide net. Really go after multiple funding opportunities for various parts of a given project. So in sum, the advice that I would distill from Queen and Elle here is that cast a wide net and set expectations, really crucial elements of grant writing.
Great, and I think we're winding down, but there's one more question. Why is contingency frowned upon?
That's a great question. Contingency fees are often frowned upon because it kind of creates a complex power dynamic between someone writing a proposal, say, and the organization or artist. And we believe that, everyone should have a livable wage, decent wage, and a contingency fee may mean that someone who's working on a proposal doesn't actually get paid for the work that they've done. And then vice versa from the applicant, the artist or org, they may have to, and this is something to look out for, actually pay a sizable percentage of a successful grant to someone who's built in a contingency fee or clause into their work. So I would avoid that at all costs. Most grant writing bodies, fundraising entities in North America frown upon that and advise against it. As I noted, it's not illegal, but it's certainly in that gray zone and a bit of a red flag. And so our suggestion, just to ensure that there's a livable wage at play and that everyone has the option for decent paid work, that you avoid that. And then there are wonderful synergies that can happen. I would encourage you to look as a point of departure for colleagues and collaborators with applications. Circling back to one of my favorite points that Kyle made, really find someone to whom you can read out loud your application and then ask them to do the same and share and create a network of mutual aid and support between your artist colleagues with your applications. It'll strengthen one another's proposal, and it'll also create a nice synergy and community around something that is a bit intimidating and mysterious. And I hope today that we've demystified this process a bit and helped build some capacity around this crucial practice.
Okay, well, if we have no more questions here, maybe we can run the poll. Jason had a poll set up. And we can continue to answer questions as they roll in. I have a question here from Ashley that says, if a group of artists work together on applying for the same grant, I think, oh, should they worry about having similarities? That's a really interesting question. I think I might need a clarification because I'm understanding the question as a group of artists working on the same, maybe multiple submissions. I'm not sure how similarities shakes out with this. Would you clarify, Ashley? Multiple submissions.
I don't
One
mind
thing I
commenting on this.
Okay.
I think this is an opportunity to really, and it's hard to do this because there obviously are limited funding opportunities, but many. I would suggest viewing this kind of problem through the lens of abundance. Find ways to collaborate and share. Try to move through what's imposed upon us in the fundraising world, which is kind of gatekeeping and like, holding a competitive point of view when it comes to, say, multiple artists applying for the same application. If you share your work, you share opportunities, you're going to strengthen one another's applications. You're going to create a network of support. And in a long-term frame, I think it'll be mutually beneficial. When we see collaborations like that occur and say, 3 amazing artists in the GTA all applying for the same application, the best scenarios are when those artists share with one another, when they break down boundaries and barriers, when they de-isolate themselves, and when they share and cultivate mutual support. It's an ethic that we take really seriously and that we try to broadcast to those folks that we connect with. I hope that helps answer your question, Ashley.
If I can jump in, I think one interpretation of the question that I wanted to cover is that there's fears of repeating language or similarities in terms of how things are framed or structured. That's going to be inevitable for these sorts of things because, again, you're kind of pulling language often from the funder. So I wouldn't worry too much about things looking the same. If the same sentences are repeating, maybe try to avoid that. But another thing to think about, if you are all individual artists applying for similar but separate projects, it might be worth considering actually partnering with each other to submit one application for a collective project. There's a number of opportunities out there for collectives, for even the R.I.S.E will highlight ad hoc collectives, i.e. groups of artists coming together for this project. So that can actually open doors. And sometimes that helps you frame your project in a way that's a little more impactful and maybe even a little more open to funding opportunities you wouldn't have had before.
It's a really good point, Kyle. And there's an opportunity actually to jump over to another wonderful question in the chat, which I'll read aloud. What advice do you have for a new nonprofit organization applying for funding? This is a really great question. To start, I would suggest looking to other ally organizations in a similar space to find synergies, reach out to them, build some connection and relationship, and inquire for information on how their journey has gone thus far, how they started funding themselves. You'll often find that organizations are more than happy to share resources and opportunities and give you some kind of inside relational tips on how to, say, pursue a funding opportunity. In Ontario specifically, I would make sure that you incorporate right away just to get the clock ticking so that you can then potentially apply a year therein for Ontario Trillium Foundation funding. OTF requires new organizations to have been incorporated legally for 1 year, typically on most of their applications. And the second you've been incorporated for a year, a whole range of opportunities at OTF open up. So that's kind of the general advice I would give. Build relationships with ally orgs, legally incorporate so that in Ontario, at least, you can access OTF, and then start prospecting using a tool like Grant Connect for new opportunities. So many of the successful applications that we see and participate in have a rich background of relationships behind them. And so I'd really center building those relationships in advance of applying for funding opportunities.
And if I can add briefly, the other thing to keep in mind is to have a project or several projects. Most funding opportunities for nonprofits aren't actually for funding just the nonprofit existing. They're for specific activities with measurable impacts. So a lot of the opportunities you're going to find need to be focused on a specific project in a specific time frame. So that's important to have in mind. It takes a long time to get what we call operational funding. Most organizations or funders aren't that interested in providing that. And really, it's only available at the top level. So think about what you're doing, when you're going to do it, and like have your plans in mind before you start that prospecting. Prospecting can help you develop those plans, but that's a key. Make sure you know what activities you're doing and what you're looking for funding to do.
And in the spirit of, Queen had a comment earlier, and they wrote, don't be afraid to approach local companies to sponsor funds. And I think merging that comment and Michael's comment about finding ally organizations you can share information and knowledge with, I think don't be afraid to reach out to organizations and artists that you admire and who have had career trajectories that you aspire to ask them how they got started. I think you'd be really surprised if there are these, wonderful, equitable organizations you admire that they'll be willing to share, like in their first year of being incorporated, like who would fund them? In the second year, who would fund them? How did they get operational funding? The organizations, if you're looking up to and wanting to replicate these organizations, they tend to be organizations that are really interested in sharing knowledge and forming allyship. So I would say reach out. And I see a question here from Elle. Do you have any recommendations for writing classes or templates that we can use to practice? This is a great question. I might pitch it to Kyle.
We've included, I'll link again the example application that we've shared. But as far as examples go, I mean, it's all going to be so particular to what you're trying to do. So again, you might be able to get examples from like-minded artists or organizations that you can work with. But I can also share, like, once you start this process, you're going to get a lot of templates for the kinds of questions that are asked, and you're going to start building your own resource of responses that clarify your mission and your values and your mandate. And over time, that's going to build into itself being a pretty awesome resource. So I can't think of anything off the top of my head that shows, a catch-all example of what a good application looks like. But I think in part because that's going to vary so much from artist to artist and organization to organization. So again, I'll reshare what the application that was earlier in the chat, but I think I'll build that into the earlier advice, which is reach out to folks you admire and see if you can get examples from them, because that's going to be a lot more targeted than like a single general, this is what a good arts application looks like.
And to answer your question too, about your looking at writing classes and how to write and practice, I just want to reemphasize too that grant writing is not a specialized skill necessarily. Grant issuers are asking questions like, who are you? What are you planning to do? How much money do you need? Why is your project important? And this is your practice, and you have the tools and the knowledge to be able to write about that. And I would just encourage, if you're looking to get better at writing or have some practice with writing, for those first few grants that you're putting together, feel confident in your like total knowledge of your own practice and projects, and just try and write in really clear language. You don't have to impress them with complex sentences or, you know, grandiose verbs and description. You can just say quite plainly, this is who I am. These are the activities I'm hoping to get funded, and this is why it's important. And I have seen grant issuers emphasize wanting people who are applying for their funding to write about their projects in their own words. You don't need to adopt anyone else's style. I think that if your language is clear, the purpose and importance of your project will really shine through.
That's a really good point, Jordan. And in sum, I wanted to share that we really believe that you already have the tools, that you're already equipped, regardless of where you're at in your artistic or organizational journey. You have the tools, and through collaboration, through networking, through reaching out to ally orgs and artists, you can build and develop those and secure funding. You can win hearts and minds, you can win grants, and you can advance your practice.
Thank you all so much. And we have one final question, I believe. Most funders don't want to fund a project that already had some funding before. I always wanted to know how they confirm if your project is new and not something you are refurbishing.
It's a great question, and you know, it's a common situation that we run into. Some funders will stipulate that an application must have, say, 50% of its budget already secured, whereas other funders will stipulate that the project needs to be new and unfunded. And so as a point of departure, really scrutinize and go through the eligibility criteria, find out where their priorities are, what's ineligible, and then go from there. The scenario you've described is very common and one that you'll probably have to confront more than once. And it's really important, as Cal and Jordan noted, to surface that problem and answer it in stage one, instead of learning, you know, on submission day that that you need to have secured funds already to apply, or vice versa, that having secured funds is to your detriment. So surface that early on and move ahead accordingly.
And they want to know, how do the funders confirm or not deny it if the project has already been made? I think those.
Yeah, that's a great question. Like typically, at least in pandemic times, notification will be received by email. You'll receive either a blanket update from a funder on when the deadline is, a customized email, or what we often see if an application is declined is a sort of templated or automated email informing you of that, of the results. Now, in that kind of scenario, there's a great opportunity. So if you're declined, which is going to happen, like set expectations, expect to not receive each fund that you apply for, and instead take that as an opportunity to build a relationship with that funder, reach out, see to what extent you can arrange a meeting or glean some feedback, and then move ahead based upon that feedback. But typically you will almost always receive notification, especially if you follow up close to or exceeding a deadline.
To follow up, I think maybe the question had more to do with how funders check that they aren't like double funding a project, that it's not work that's already been completed. And in that case, like it's kind of complicated because yeah, they'll look up on you. They have a vested interest in making sure that you're not cheating them out of money, and that the money that they give you is going to where you say it's going to go to. So a lot of that's going to come up in your report, reports, the interim report and the final report. I think it's really tough for a funder to determine whether or not you're pitching something that's already been done going in. They'll be able to sniff that out a lot better once that work has started to be done and once you're giving them the records that you need to show. And I'll say, if that happens, if they see that you're actually double charging various agencies for the same costs, that's going to be a problem, and that is going to follow you because that's actually fraud. So there's legal implications. That said, you can apply often, not in every case, but some funders will fund new activities for the same project. So if it's not a new project, but you're extending it, or you're building it out, or you're making it bigger, you can apply. You just need to be upfront about where you're getting funding and where that funding is going, if that helps.
Yeah, I think that answered their question. So, thank you.
Maybe as a point to tie things up, I love Elle's summary in the chat here for those of you on YouTube. A rejected application, in Elle's words, you said it better than I could, is divine redirection, an opportunity to ask for feedback and implement it for the next round. It's not a no unless you stop. It's just not yet. That's such a wonderful summary of an approach to grant writing, fundraising, and artistic practice. Thank you, Elle. Well, I'd like
Hello.
to take, oh, after you, Randall.
Okay, cool. No, if you want to go ahead, Kyle. Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I really appreciated this opportunity to talk to everyone, to share knowledge, to hopefully demystify this space, and I hope build some capacity and confidence around this crucial practice to grow your artistic practice and organizations. So thank you, everyone.
All right, everyone. This concludes our Edutainment Summit Day 3, our grant writing panel with Kyle, Jordan, and Michael. I want to take the moment just to say thank you. Thank you to the three of you for bringing your expertise with understanding grants, understanding how to write them, managing the budget, the work plan, the process, the storytelling. And I'm so glad, Kyle, you mentioned something about it being a creative process. And I think for many of us artists, it's really easy to see grant writing as this monolith or thing that you have to climb, but not seeing that you can incorporate your creative writing into it. And I love that you incorporated that as well. And just like the tips and tools that all of you were able to bring. So thank you so much. It's great to see some artists that I love and respect here in the chat. I'm not gonna shout. If I shout a couple people, it's like, oh, what about me? I ain't gonna do that today. But big up to all of you. If you're here, you already know what it is. I'm just gonna turn it over to Jason. If you could just put the poll up, please, and thank you. Again, for any of you who are on your mobile device, just keep in mind that you'll see a green strip across your page, and that is going to be the prompt for the poll. You may be wondering, why are they doing a poll? So these incredible individuals were the ones that actually helped us get the sponsorship, the funds to get this money from Lush to put this on and continue to give you free programming. And I feel like a broken record because I've been saying it all weekend. But this poll helps us get a better sense of what your needs are, what you're learning, what you have learned. And hopefully we can take some of this content and use it for future applications. So that being said, thank you all again. And I'm just gonna be quiet for a couple minutes as we ask y'all to complete the poll, and then I'll wrap it up for the very, very end. Yeah, and thank you, Becca. For any of you who want to share, like, yes, use the poll, but if you have anything specific that you've learned, it would be great for Michael, Kyle, and Jordan, even for themselves, to understand, like, what did you take away from today's session? So if you want to ask what you're taking away from the session or answer what you're taking away from the session, something you learned, something that stood out to you, it'd be really helpful for all of us to get a sense of where the key learnings were. So thank you. And yeah, the poll's up. Yep. No, sorry, I knew that I was I'm muted. Thanks for the just having a conversation. Alrighty, y'all. So we have about 18 out of 20 of you that have submitted your poll. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. I was literally, that's why we make a really good team. We have about 30 seconds left. We'll make it happen. Queen, whoever was reading my lips, that would be a straight talent if you read my lips and knew all of what I was talking about. I love basketball. I was talking about basketball if anybody's wondering. All right, but another 15 seconds to wrap up. And thank you so much, Elle. This is what I love about having a team. So as I mentioned a little earlier, when we were doing the Secure the Bag workshop, Siddhartha is one of the artists that we spotlighted for this summit. So we do call it the Edutainment Summit on purpose. You get an opportunity to get some education about professional development and artistic practice, and then also an opportunity to watch some incredible entertainment as well too. So if you want to head over to our YouTube page, as was put in there from Elle de Leon, you can find our YouTube page that will take you over to the spotlight video that we have presented for you. So thank you everyone for being here as well too. Feel free to continue letting us know what you learned, what you're taking away. This is super duper helpful. But on that note, I want to just thank the Emergent team. I want to thank my team. My team, I can't even emphasize how great it is to have a team like the one I have. We've been working very hard, working very, very hard. And I just want to take a moment just to big up everybody. Elle, thank you so much for putting, just getting us organized, keeping us together. Marissa, thank you for just being the glue on the team. Shakoy for promoting and making us laugh. Sierra for all that you did during this weekend, helping organize the advanced panel, taking questions from today as well too. Jason, my man, Jason, thank you for just being you. That's it. Like, Jason's my right-hand man. Thank you, Jason, for being you. Blake is a new member on our team. Blake, I want to shout you out and just say thank you for being you and being our resident DJ during this and just supporting us through. But I got to give a huge thank you to Anastasia De Leon for not only managing, organizing, coordinating, venue scouting, like all of it, all of it from the A to the Z, and seeing this come into fruition. I really got to give flowers to those who deserve. My whole team does, but Anastasia, you know what it is. Thank you for putting this together. Huge thank you. And to all of you for being here. This was our 8th annual Edutainment Summit. We hope to continue doing this summit, and we hope to see you at our next one. Stay tuned for more. The last thing I can share with you all is February is going to be a pretty fun month for us. We're not going to be starting our regular open mics up until Monday. March the 7th will be our open mics right here on Zoom. So we encourage you, because that's every Monday of the year, except for holidays, we're here on Zoom, welcoming you to express yourself in a positive way and just take space, take space and build community. And I think the last thing I'll share with you is we have something called Frequency Fridays that we'll be doing as well. And we have giveaways happening all week long. Some of these giveaways include creative consultation with Shakoy to understand your branding and your social media a little bit better, more intimately, financial coaching with Shay, an opportunity to potentially get yourself a free grant written in partnership with R.I.S.E, So there's a lot of giveaways happening this week. Stay tuned on our Instagram, because if you heard me right, if you win, you can get a chance to have a grant written on your behalf in partnership with R.I.S E, where we will support you in helping actualize that grant. And all I could say is I wish those opportunities existed when I was kind of learning, and I mean that, like, you can really get a grant written for you on our behalf, and that's just love from us and our community. Yeah, that's bananas. So stay tuned. All I'm saying, stay tuned on the Instagram, because you don't want to miss. Like, if you miss out on a day, you might miss out on an opportunity to understand how to get involved. So yes, we're using this as branding, as an opportunity for you to stay in tune on our Instagram and what we're doing. But again, thank you all so much. Really appreciate all that you do. And we'll see you soon. Be well. Musica asks, sorry, what do you have to do again for the contest? So one of the things that we had for the contest is Zen Soul had a video that she did. She did this video with us for the artist spotlight on Friday. And so that was premiered on Friday evening. What we asked you to do was to join the artist, the artist panel that we did. I'm sorry, I'm just having a brain fart right now, but the music management panel that we had on Friday. And then Zen Soul gave some advice and tips about things she would say and share with up and coming artists. If you DM us on our Instagram with what Zen Soul shared and some information about the artist panel, and DM us on Instagram, that's how you can enter. So yes, you're gonna attend the panel, which you've already done. The keyword is alchemy. The keyword is alchemy. And you're gonna go check out the check out the feedback from Zen Soul, the advice that she provided. And that's how you can enter to win. So yeah, the keyword is alchemy, and then go listen to what Zen Soul shared. DM us, and then we're gonna enter you in a draft. Y'all know what I mean. It's getting late. I'm tired. But thank you again. Really appreciate it. Yeah, tell a friend to tell a friend. But on behalf of the R.I.S E team, just want to say thank you again, and I wish you all a wonderful Sunday evening. Take care. And